Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee, so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you have not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons so you know when we have new episodes for you. And of course, share our videos with all your contacts.
Prologue. Spokes Air Malloy recently returned from the war, stood at the corner of Lobungula Street and Selborne Avenue, and waited on a promise. In 1941, the British had pledged that if he went to fight against the Germans, they would give him many acres of farming land that he could call his own. What man did not want a piece of viable land that belonged to him? And so Spokes had eagerly signed the papers they put in front of him, immediately joined the ranks of the newly formed African Rifles, and gladly collected the issued uniform, feeling all the while certain that this was a step in the right direction for him. Even when they refused to give him, a soldier in the African Rifles, a rifle, Spokes chose to overlook the irony of the situation and chose instead to believe that he was walking towards something truly glorious. So strong was his belief in this glorious something that when they made his unit carry things here, there, and everywhere, Spokes steadfastly refused to call himself a porter. He had joined the war a soldier, and as he carried weapons, ammunition, sundry supplies, and wares in all kinds of weather and across desert and tundra, he saw this as his necessary contribution to the war effort. When others of his ilk began to criticize the British for what they perceived to be unfair and unequal treatment, Spokes valiantly refused to be drawn into their malaise. His only complaint, and it was a small one, was that the greens and slouch hats that constituted their uniform did not seem to have taken into consideration all the various climates through which they would have to travel. As he walked alongside men whose boots had been filled with sand or caked in mud, or frozen hard by snow, men bent double by the things they carried, men who wished they had been assigned to Burma, where the real fighting with rifles was, or to Durban, where they could at least escort Italian prisoners of war. Spokes knew he had to tread lightly. This was because he was the only man in the entire history of his country, perhaps the entire history of the world, whose grandfather and father had been hanged by the neck until they were dead. This rather weighty inheritance not only made him a rare and unique man, it also made him realize that he had to cultivate a tenable relationship with the British.
So, but in this third book in the trilogy, Quality of Mercy, so you focus more on themes of resistance and acceptance at the end of the colonial period. So what do you expect your readers to take away from the interplay of this theme that shape individuals' response to historical changes? You know, like you said, you were born in that period, very significant historical period. Although the country here remains nameless, but I think anybody who knows anything about Zimbabwe knows. Yes. So yes, please, can you share that with us?
So the Quality of Mercy is about a character, Spokes Malloy, who is a member of what was then called the British South Africa Police. And he has risen in the ranks over a long period of time. His dilemma in the novel is whether or not he should retire. It's almost independence. His wife wants him to retire, and he's thinking, should I? This is a dilemma that other characters in the novel also face for different reasons. So the whole idea of letting go or holding on is very central in the novel. And I think this is what happens when we are in the liminal space or in the space between two very different things, right? We have to make choices. And so I think all the characters are finding themselves having to choose what to do with this newfound independence. Is it even independence? What does independence actually mean?
How do
Because
we
when you
even
read,
how do we even play out this independence? How do we
yes,
perform independence?
yes, yes. Because here we've been colonized all our lives, right? And all of
Yeah,
a sudden you're
what
saying
does it
tomorrow you will
mean?
be independent. And it's like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
so I think we all have to come to an understanding of what that means for ourselves, right? And so I think for different characters in the novel, it means different things. But I think that um, is a very crucial thing. Again, I think going back to the theory of flight, where there's that euphoria. So I grew up with a lot of images, because again, I was born around this area of that euphoric moment, right? When Zimbabwe gets its independence and people are dancing in the streets and it's amazing
Mm,
and wonderful. And I think that played for the largest part of my childhood, even when it was becoming very apparent that that had been a moment. We may no
mm,
longer be that moment, and we may need to face other realities. And I think the novel definitely is saying, yes, we're here, everything seems possible, but what is that everything, right? What does it mean to be a person who was working in someone's garden and to be independent? What does it mean to be the person who had employed that person and be independent? Does the independence mean the same thing to both of you? What does freedom
mm,
mean to, so this is, I think, the important thing, like, what does it mean for you to be liberated, right? Because this is about liberation. So what does that liberation mean to all these individual people? And I think they're all grappling with that. It's something that, in retrospect, it's like, oh, you should, it seems easy. But again, if all you have known is this top-down structure that says at the top are these people and then at the bottom are these people, and this is how we've bifurcated society, this is not easy. And so
mm,
for my country, there has to be a coming, for the people in this novel, there has to be a coming to some understanding of what this means.
mm.
And it's not an easy journey.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people of your generation born who did not really experience the colonialism, you're at an advantage, I think.
Mm,
Your perspective, you have an advantage of seeing things differently from those who really
mm,
have those difficult choices of difficult
mhm,
challenge of making those transitions. I
mm,
mean,
mm,
and I think it shows in the way you have crafted
mm,
Spook's Molloy's character, because he is a character who reflects some level of moral clarity that is not
mm,
that you don't see in other characters, and
mm,
and I think so. Has it does do you think being born when you were,
mm,
equipped you to be able to,
mm.
present us with a story like Spokes Malloy?
I see. So I think the answer to that is yes and no. So yes, I think definitely being born when I was shapes how I see that moment. But also in a very interesting way, the novel is dedicated to my grandparents because my grandparents are very present in the novel. So Spokesman Lloyd's character is actually built on my grandfather.
Oh,
And my grandfather was this person, who who was this who held on to integrity no matter what was happening. And he taught me a lot about how to find the nuance in everything, not to be too
um,
quick to judge, to stand back and analyze things. He was a pastor and a teacher, and I remember being a child and going to him angry about something, and he would just say, "Stop, think, what really happened?"
mm,
That kind of thing. Like, and so he taught me how to actually think the way I do. And I really wanted to celebrate those kinds of people because I think we sometimes forget that they once did exist because
yeah.
it's kind of, integrity is not something that we talk about anymore. It seems a little bit old fashioned, but I really learned a lot about how the world works by sitting close to my grandfather and him just making me stop and process things. So yes, I think, he was a prisoner of war. So he was in prison during the war because he was on the side of the nationalists. So he was, helping people cross borders and all that stuff. And we had to be refugees for the first few years of my life. And I remember once saying to him, "Oh, I hate the people who did this to you." And he said to me, "But what did they do to you? Why would you hate them if they didn't do anything to you?" And that
Mm,
will always stay with me,
wow.
because I was like, "Oh, okay." you know so that made me take a step back and actually think, what was I trying to communicate, and all of that stuff. And he was just amazing like that. And so
He
I really
must
wanted
have
to
been.
capture that kind of person
He
through
must have
Spokesman
been.
Roy.
He must have been. He must have been that extraordinary character who had the ability, to see outside of, all the chaos
Yes,
around. And this is who we have in a spokesman. You capture him beautifully.
thank you. Thank
And this
you.
actually answers my next question about the research. You actually had a living example to draw
Yes,
from, you know.
yes,
It,
yeah.
I thoroughly I love spokesman. I didn't even know it was a real, part of your life.
Mm,
You were blessed.
thank you.
So yeah, the entire trilogy, and now that I have this background about Spokes Molloy, it illustrates, it kind of explains how, because the question I was going to ask,
Mm,
was about the historical accuracy,
mm,
which
mm,
I kind of, was fascinated by in the first of the two. Uh,
mm,
and this third one, which takes place during your lifetime, and
mm,
the way in which you still you were able to use your knowledge of the times, and then
mm,
also draw on the history of your grandparents,
mm,
uh,
mm.
tell a very engaging story. And I can see now that, yeah, I can see it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. Yeah, so thank you,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon or by buying me coffee, so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons. Don't forget to share our videos with all your contacts, and keep your comments coming.